to give my bit on what is and what is not Snow Leopard and how it relates to a lot of the arguments that I see out there. And this will include items and arguments in relation to Windows 7 as well. The first thing that I hear in both operating systems that are currently out there, Windows 7 of course not being fully released, but it is that Snow Leopard is a service pack and Windows 7 is a service pack, i.e. in that Snow Leopard is still Leopard and Windows 7 is still very much Vista. So, while they are both incremental advancements with both operating systems, an increment does not denote a service pack. Now I know that Tiger, which I could still say is my favorite version of OS X thus far, had what, 150 features that came out, and then Leopard topped it with several more. One of the other things that I always hear about the whole service pack is that, well, Windows is just Vista. You know, they're not doing a whole lot either. If I recall, and I've stated in many videos, Windows has jumped around. It's changed code bases or rewritten things, especially when it went from 98 to the whole NT model, Windows 2000 XP. But when Microsoft finally does an incremental change, they're doing it wrong again. I also think that's unfair because I think where credit should be given if it's deserved, right? OS X has always been incremental. So if it's incremental to go from Vista to Windows 7, why is that a bad thing? I think that Microsoft has learned, hey, let's do some incremental changes. We're going to do some tweaks here and there, and let's not disturb the hornet's nest, as they have experienced in the past. So if they've learned from a mistake, I think credit should be given for learning. This goes in line with, it doesn't matter if you're a Mac fan or a PC fan. I don't wish any type of problems on any computer user, no matter the operating system you use. Snow Leopard, majority of it is internal. And I could also say that a tremendous amount of internals have been reworked within Windows 7, as you can see in my Windows 7 video. Certainly, Windows 7 has presented more graphical changes, but why are graphical changes always the meat of everything in terms of, well, we must see the change, rather not perhaps feel the change. Feel, i.e. performance. But that does beg the question, what kind of performance are we indeed getting? So, now in lies performance. Many are considering the performance to come from 64-bit. I can tell you that 64-bit is actually one of the smallest gains that many of you are getting. Now you're probably asking, why would I state something like that? Well, I'm going to actually go into what has been improved within Snow Leopard to actually get you a lot of those gains and performances. Now, it's not going to be significant, but let's say a gain here, a small gain here, and a small gain here, and a small gain here. They add up over a general line of performance and can equate to a pretty much larger performance gain. But let's go back to what this whole 64-bit thing. People are saying the compatibility issues are 64-bit, and the performance here is 64-bit, 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 64-bit. Now I do have a video where I explain the differences between 32-bit and 64-bit. And what I was trying to explain in that video was just to put it in layman's terms, you can do more. Doing more does not necessarily mean you do go faster. 64-bit inherently at the very low levels is faster. It has more registers, its execution math can do more, so on and so forth. But doing more, like I said, is not always speed. You can increase your variable set and therefore include different kinds of computings or add things. For instance, adding more memory. Now, adding more memory doesn't necessarily make you go faster either. You could have a 16-bit application running on a 16-bit operating system, and while it does less, it can be as efficient and as fast as a higher bit level program. Of course, the limitation is that it cannot do as much as its larger bit sets. So let's not get into the whole speed thing, because you could certainly have a whole 64-bit operating system and it can perform terribly slow. Okay? Being on 64-bit, don't think of that as the end-all be-all and this is why I'm going faster. This also gets into the argument of, well, all Snow Leopard did was add 64-bit and Windows already had it, and so on and so forth. Well, it is true that Windows has been full 64-bit while OS X has been implementing layers of 64-bit. These are, like I've said in many of my videos, two very different ideologies. Windows runs two different sets of operating systems physically, and Snow Leopard combines the two. You could technically say, at the Snow Leopard level, that there are two kernels in there, to simplistically speak, and two different modes run within OS X. But its packaging is very different from Windows. Because you can, technically speaking, Windows separates the package. And Windows has been dealing with full 64-bit on their 64-bit systems and had to have come up with what they call Windows on Windows 64 to emulate for 32 so that 32 doesn't have compatibility issues. Because it is indeed, if you do buy the 64-bit version of Windows, you don't have the whole switching as OS X does within its Mac-O file. But basically, these Mac-O files are executables that do store on, is this 32-bit, is this 64-bit, is it, or it used to also, is it PowerPC, or is it Intel, kind of thing. So, two different ideologies. But yes, Windows is full 64-bit, and now that Snow Leopard has come, they have added the 64-bit fully to its kernel level, whereas Leopard, it wasn't there at the kernel level. But for most of us, we're not running on the 64-bit kernel, and we probably won't for a while. That's why so many, and I hear arguments, oh, well, Windows is still on 32-bit. So is Snow Leopard very much. The advantages that you can have is that you can say, well, I have some 64-bit applications running on a 32-bit kernel using address extension to allow those 64-bit applications to run, but they're still running on that 32-bit kernel. Whereas if you are on a Windows 32-bit system, you're on a Windows 32-bit system, and you're likely not going to have the address extension, because Windows' answer is, buy our 64-bit system, and your 32-bit apps will be running on our Windows on Windows 64. So it is a fallacy to say that the Windows world will be stuck in 32, because a lot of the Mac world is also going to remain in 32 for a long time. Apple is hoping that developers will answer their call in what they've provided in Snow Leopard to bring their demographics up to 64-bit. But look, Windows is the largest demographic as it is, and they have a hard time with developers bringing their own demographics up to 64-bit. It's not likely to be any different on the Mac side. It is a slow progression and probably very frustrating for both companies in trying to get user bases to come up to higher bit levels in what it constitutes, because logistically it means us as consumers, usually if we're on our older hardware, have to upgrade our hardware, buy new operating systems, run into compatibility issues, other issues with drivers, so on and so forth. So a lot of it's a tough thing to do. So we can't all just feel that while we do have the ability and the option to be 64-bit, that our experience at the computing level will be there. Simplistically speaking, most of us are running Snow Leopard on a 32-bit kernel with address extension to support those applications that want to run in 64-bit mode, or you do have the option to boot into the 64-bit kernel directly. You may run into some driver issues, so on and so forth, but that's Apple's answer to try not to run in as many issues as Microsoft has had to contend with in driver issues that need to be at below the 4 gig barrier. In mapping, Windows answered their compatibility issue at their 64-bit level with Windows on Windows 64. So those are the two end results. What is in Snow Leopard that makes it faster, as we're saying? Because I did state that 64-bit is only a small part of it. We, after all, have been running on 64-bit at the G5 level on PowerPC was already 64-bit, and then there was a lull going back to 32-bit for a short time with Macs on the switch to Intel, and going back up to Core 2 to 64-bit. So certainly OS X has experienced the 64-bit computing early on. But the real power comes in to what they did inside of Snow Leopard and rewriting a lot of their APIs, mainly Cocoa. There also is a lot of work in how they rewrote and what they got rid of in terms of CPU cycles, reads from the hard drive, so on and so forth. So what am I getting at in specifics? Well, when you do rewrite things, and let's say that you change compression, you make files and executables smaller, you make your memory management even more efficient, you make your thread management more efficient, how you access multiple or multiprocessing. All these things contribute to speed and what you're going to feel. These are the exact same things that Windows 7 is doing, as I stated in my Windows 7 vid, and if you want to see those details, please do go and see my Windows 7 video. Because these internal changes are really the crux of going to getting you those extra power out of your applications. Now, this then leads me to disk space. This whole argument of, well, what is the footprint of Snow Leopard? There are many articles now that are out there saying, well, base 10 is now the default for Snow Leopard versus base 2. Now, I do plan to do a video on how do we get into base 2 and base 10. But there is an old article that I read long ago on base 2 exists in computers because it ultimately ends up to either being a 1 or a 0. In humans, we like to count in base 10 because we have 10 fingers. So, you can take it with a grain of, you can take it with a grain of salt, but it has to do with two very different ways of the size of the set of numbers we're going to use and how we calculate. Because actually, base 2 is simpler arithmetic than using base 10, and many of you will be confused. But I'm not going to bore down this video with the whole difference between base 2 and base 10. But I do want to say that there are too many out there saying, well, I'm getting 30 gigs and I'm getting 20 gigs, saving in space, so on and so forth. The change from base 10 or from base 2 to base 10 does make your hard drive look like you have more room. Okay, the same space is there, but that doesn't mean that Snow Leopard doesn't have a smaller footprint. It does. It's about 7 or 8 gigs smaller, I would say, from what I've observed. Where does this space come from? It's not coming from the whole Mako files where you're taking out the PowerPC binaries. It contributes to it. It's not really the largest part of it. In fact, Leopard has what you call next step interface builder files in it. that are part of the application bundles. The footprint of Leopard, I'm not saying Snow Leopard, the footprint of Leopard actually should have been smaller. But when it was released, these application bundles had much larger than needed package sizes. These extra files were removed in Snow Leopard. So you could say that the footprint, at least for the next step interface builder files, is a correction from a mistake that was left in Leopard and now has been rectified in Snow Leopard. And it's not a mistake in terms of, oh, it's going to cause problems. It simply was there was extra files within the whole next step interface builder application bundles. So the other part that saved space is that, especially within the whole file system and the way that now things are being stored with compression going from a lot of XML formats to now a compressed binary format, these all contribute to the massive space saving. But from what I've seen and read in articles is that the application package sizes are significantly smaller. We're talking, in some cases, 60% smaller, and on average 50% smaller. That's a significant thing versus the whole concept of people saying, well, the whole PowerPC Mach-O file headers are removed. You're talking about little bitty headers within these Mach-O files that go to the kernel to do a switch on what it is, Intel, 32-bit, 64-bit, so on and so forth. It does add up, but it's not the largest player in why the footprint of Snow Leopard is smaller. And it's not going to be the whole 20 gigs and things that people are saying. My guess is that the difference between the 20 or 30 that you may be hearing or reading about versus the 7 is the hard drive difference of going to base 10 to match what hard drive vendors are doing. Let's move on to when you rewrite the whole these compatibility issues. There certainly are a lot of people complaining. I am one of them, and I will give my own personal experience as a Snow Leopard. While Snow Leopard didn't have a whole lot of new features, still, in what they did can cause a lot of compatibility issues, and it's certainly happened to me. It's happened to most people that I know. Does it mean that Snow Leopard is as bad as Windows? No, but I am hearing a lot of Mac supporters use the very same arguments that Windows supporters used when the glove was on the other hand, and saying, well, developers need to change the drivers, well, this software vendor needs to catch up. And a lot of the arguments that were used against Windows, the Windows defenders would say, yeah, there needs to be better written drivers and better written applications, so on and so forth. And the reality is that bad programming can exist on whether you're a Mac or Windows. Certainly, Windows has its issues. After all, I do advocate OS X. But let's put the ducks in the correct pond, as in saying, if you're going to state something, let's have it dwell in the realm of the truth, okay? I don't want to come off and support something that is not factual and say, well, it's holier because it's on the Mac side, even though it's experiencing a driver incompatibility or an application incompatibility because it's not Windows or what have you. And because it may be on Windows, that it's now inferior just because it's dubbed on a Windows platform. There are other reasons that I have very clearly stated on why Windows is in the boat that it is versus where OS X is, and so on and so forth. But it's certainly not going to be in that of application compatibility and driver issues. After all, one of the major reasons why the default kernel is 32-bit is to try to prevent a lot, or the potential of driver failures being mapped incorrectly, so on and so forth. So that's why you will not hear me state problems with Windows in terms of what they've had if it's a development issue on either side of the fence. Now, the whole 32-bit deal, people will state, well, I'm running on a 32-bit kernel. How does 64-bit run? Well, I had a debate with EMEEK on what was an address, linear address extension, Intel's version, physical address extension, that originally he got from an article and was trying to purport it as an advance in technology that was not really available to Windows. Whereas Windows didn't want to go PAE because they already had a 64-bit operating system. Their answer to saying, why do we need to give you address extension? We already have a 64-bit operating system. Whereas OS X is combining both in one flavor, and trying to give you two flavors in one flavor. And if you do that, you need to have address extension because you want to support higher, the above 4 gig barrier for the higher level bit structures and not crowd out the 32-bit map. So that was the whole reason why they wanted to have the physical address extension. And that was in Leopard, and it still is within Snow Leopard when you're running on a 32-bit kernel. There is no other way for you to get a higher map level beyond the 4 gig barrier without an address extension. So the majority of us are still running on that, while we may have more 64-bit mode apps. If you're not running in the 64-bit kernel, you are running on the extensions. Now, my own story with Snow Leopard is that many of my friends and acquaintances have had issues, and some of them minor, some of them major. The worst one being with my own parents. I couldn't even tell you what happened when after the upgrade. It seemed that Snow Leopard had removed all of the applications. They were present physically as an icon in the dock, but it had a question mark over many of the applications, meaning that you couldn't find the applications. And I searched and searched for these applications, and my parents run 3 user accounts. So that, there's my mother's side, my father's side, my brother has one, the root admin, of course, or the plain administrator has one. So it was really a major issue. And they basically were brought back to Leopard, and they don't want to really go up to Snow Leopard. And there really is no reason to. They don't have any real 64-bit apps. They won't get all of the nice rewrites of Cocoa and the whole smaller footprint. But in such small percents of a game, it's not worth a lot of the headaches. So that was my personal experience of Snow Leopard. Many of you will not experience issues, and that's great. Many of you are going to be doing clean installs, and things will be snappier, and that's a good thing. I don't wish really issues on anybody, whether you run Windows or OS X or Linux, what have you. I've had my share of fixing computers, and whether it's for my clients, and many nights running 24-hour shifts, sleeping in sleeping bags, and eating pizza, and trying to resolve solutions that I spent so many years when I was doing hardware repair and network repair, so on and so forth. It's not fun, and it's not a fun experience, and I don't think it's also a fun experience to have to always do a clean install. I personally feel that, man, it's a major hassle to install something, even to the point of doing an archive install. It's just a major hassle. I want to be able to install the operating system. I'll accept a margin of bugs, but I'm not going to risk what I've experienced personally and or heard from friends, family, acquaintances, so on and so forth for my own. I will have more videos on the technologies of 64-bit beyond what I've already gone through on Grand Central, OpenCL, because there's so much talk now about base 2, base 10, and any more 64-bit questions that many of you may have. And please feel free to respond, comment. I also wanted to add that a lot of my conversations spill over into Twitter. My handle on Twitter is also MrBit10, and I do provide a lot of articles and links, things that I find in the news that I find helpful to things that I like, that I feel help educate and or further support some of the videos that I do make. I don't use Twitter so much to say, hey, I'm brushing my teeth now, or doing this now. I'll have the occasional saying, hey, I'm going out of town, I'm not available, but I heavily use it for support of the videos and or education of technology. So if interested, consider Twitter an extension to the videos that I make here on YouTube. Anyway, thanks for watching.